It would help if I fixed it so that people could actually see what I'm going to be talking about. My apologies. So, there have been a series of coups in what is widely known as the Coup Belt of West Africa. Um, and Twitter being what it is, people have a variety of takes on it. Like this one. It's funny that there are people who call the coup plotter in Burkina Faso the new Sankara. He has already promised to bind himself to Russian imperialism. There are groups of reactionary Pan Africans who promote proximity to Russian and Chinese imperialism. These, through the comprador bourgeoisie of some countries, are linked to the Wagner Group in an anti French and anti Western key. Africa must not be a land for the division of superpowers, and as Marxists, we oppose all imperialism. So that's a pretty standard Maoist line on these sorts of things. Um, let's just be honest. Africa has been a battlefield for a very long time of various groups of great powers. Why? Because Africa is the richest continent in the world. That's why. And because it's not united, because it is by and large run by what we call the comprador bourgeoisie, basically sellouts who have insinuated themselves into power in countries that, for all intents and purposes, are not independent. Okay, having a flag, a national anthem, and some territory that's ostensibly under your control, it's not independence. Independence means that you are in full control of your land and resources, and you use your land and resources for the benefit of your people. Otherwise, you're just somebody's running dog, to use my favorite Maoist phrase. But it's a little more nuanced than this, okay? Because Africa is not independent. There are many people in the continent, matter of fact, most people in the continent, excepting the comprador bourgeoisie, the people who actually profit from selling their resources and selling their land and auctioning off their sovereignty, what little bit of it they have, to various imperialisms. Pretty much all of Africa agrees that unity is the best strategy. So, African people worldwide can be said to be Pan African. So, what the fuck is going on? Like, what is everybody talking about? Um, Stuff like this. Niger politely asks the French to leave and suspends gold and uranium exports. So, Niger, not Nigeria, Niger, a former French colony, is a heavy exporter of both gold and uranium. As a matter of fact, I've been seeing things that say 1 out of every 3 light bulbs in France is powered by Nigerian uranium. So they're basically saying that they're going to put the French in the dark. So got people going wild and waving Russian flags. Yeah, you've got people waving Russian flags. Granted, the account that this is on is a very pro Russian Z bullshit account, but it just saddens me to see like Africans, black people, waving Russian flags. Like, why don't you wave your own flag? You are in Niger, you're not in Russia. So that's why people are talking about these coups are basically just Russian, going to be Russian puppets. But like, again, it's a little more nuanced. And there's been a lot of talk about the summit that a lot of African leaders attended in Russia. So I'm going to cover that later. That's just a surreal vibe. There's actually a cult here called Black Hammer. Its leader is currently in jail. But like they did stuff like this. Like when Russia invaded Ukraine, they had people in the streets of Atlanta and other cities where they had a substantial presence waving Russian flags and that stupid Z symbol that they use. So very odd. and it starts to send gold and uranium to Moscow because Russian colonialism is the better kind of colonialism. Well, at least Moscow pays better commission to the elite of the country. And this individual that posted this, DD Geopolitics, um, is saying, worry about your own country. That's a common retort. Like, Russia is an imperialist country, okay? It is carrying on imperialism in Africa and certainly in Ukraine. They see Ukraine as being part of the Russian world or Russia's backyard. So, as leftists, we have to oppose backyardism. I did a stream last week where I showed a very good video from a Belarusian anarchist. Belarus is actually like Russia's main ally in the region. They've used it as a staging ground for attacks on Ukraine, but there's Belarusian anarchists fighting alongside the Ukrainian army. Very good internationalism. This tweet is unavailable. I don't have any uranium. I don't personally don't have any uranium to sell, sir, so I will not ask you to buy any. Oh my God, you're from England? Get the fuck out of here. Muted. Which now will be stolen by Wagner, Putin, as soon as they have control. Weird how Africans seem to prefer that over whatever the West offers. So this account, which is basically a Russian shell account, it's treating Africa again as a battlefield and a zone for the extraction of materials. Like, where's the Pan Africanism? Where is the solidarity with people who do not want to be robbed by either the rest or Russia? Like, how long is the continent going to be a stomping ground for mercenaries, Western and Russian, and just fucked over? So, yeah, it's a clusterfuck. But like, can anything good come out of this? The primary contradiction, okay, the main thing that's going on in the region is French and American imperialism. Um, you've got this military command, AFRICOM, United States Africa Command, that has been running amok in the region for quite a while now. It's not even headquartered in Africa, it's headquartered in Stuttgart, Germany. It is one of 11 U.S. Department of Defense combatant commands, each with a geographic or functional mission that provides command and control of military forces in peace and war. U.S. Africa Command employs the broad-reaching diplomacy, development, and defense approach to foster interagency efforts and help negate the drivers of conflict and extremism in Africa. So that's a contradiction because the United States is one of the main drivers of conflict and extremism in Africa, along with France. Like, they're talking about ISIS rebels, all sorts of sectarian separatist groups in the region. Like, who is responsible for the rise of ISIS in the first place? The United States destabilized the Middle East and basically let loose the hounds of war in this area. A full spectrum combatant command, U.S. Africa Command, is responsible for all U.S. Department of Defense operations, exercises, and security cooperation on the African continent, its island nations, and surrounding waters. The area of responsibility consists of 53 African states, more than 800 ethnic groups, over 1,000 languages, vast natural resources, a land mass of 11.2 million square miles, 3.5 times the size of the U.S., and nearly 19,000 miles of coastland. U.S. Africa Command began initial operations October 1st, 2007, and became fully operational October 1st, 2008. So this thing was started under Bush. So Bush basically just threw us all over the fucking world. He started the war in Iraq. He didn't get enough trying to chew up the Middle East. He also had to go fuck around in Africa. So this is their leadership. You've got General Michael Langley. Ooh, black guy. Read this biography in French and Arabic. I don't want to. So the commander is a neo-colonial puppet. White dude. Michael Woods. Deputy commander, another white dude with a very horrible hairline, but I'm one to talk. Deputy to the Commander for Civil Military Engagement, Ambassador Andrew Young, U.S. Department of State. Oh. Headquarters Chief of Staff, Major General David Francis, U.S. Army. So, one black guy and 3 white dudes. Nobody ever talks about how France became a beacon of nuclear energy. They steal the resources from Africa. Precisely. They also tested nuclear weapons in Algeria. People are still getting sick from it to this day. So, what does it do? They stage exercises, which are basically mini wars. African Lion 22, the 2022 iteration of U.S. Africa Command's largest and premier annual exercise, involved more than 7,500 service members from June 6th to the 30th. African Lion 22 executed in four countries: Morocco, Ghana, Senegal, and Tunisia. Militaries from Brazil, Chad, France, Italy, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom will join U.S. and host nation troops. U.S. participants come from all service components, including the reserves and National Guard. Like, why the fuck are you using Africa as a basically a giant airsoft range? So they have a bunch of directorates that like these people mean nothing good to Africa. They should not be there. So what has the U.S. been doing in Africa? Engaging in Niger to better security and cooperation efforts. December 8th, 2022. So a gallery, bunch of white people hanging out in the desert. I guess they're making a point to send black troops to Africa, so it's not a like it's still an army of occupation. But hey, we look like you. On any given day across Africa, more than 2,000 soldiers are supporting U.S. strategic and security interests alongside like minded partners. Alongside our Nigerian partners, our soldiers and other U.S. service members are enabling a joint and multinational effort to counter violent extremist organizations and improve the capabilities of the Nigerian armed forces. So basically, just spin doctor shit. The U.S. has no business in Africa, especially sending military force there. So, this guy Ibrahim Traore has been getting a lot of attention. He was born in 1988, so very young, the youngest president anywhere in the world. And he's been making the rounds in Russia, and he's been getting pretty spicy. He accused other African leaders of being beggars at the Russia Africa summit that was held in St. Petersburg. He's 35 years old. And this quote has been making the rounds. My generation does not understand this. How can Africa, which has so much wealth, become the poorest continent in the world today? And why do African leaders travel the world to beg? Responding to Traore, Senegalese President Macky Sall, a comprador, said, African leaders should not come here to beg. We are working for cooperation based on equal conditions between the countries. We say the same thing in St. Petersburg or in Washington. Our task is to solve the problem of terrorism that has ravaged our continent and to ensure the development of the continent. So, I'm not an autarkist, okay? I'm not a type of person who thinks that, oh, you can do everything all by yourself. Yes, international trade, provided the terms are favorable and conducive to continuing independence of the country, is good. But are these deals that are being struck by people who do not consult the masses, like, are these deals that are being struck, are they really conducive to continued independence or enhanced independence? Because I already said that these are not independent countries. They're being used as battlegrounds and diplomatic tools by one to the other. Great power. Like, are these things good for the masses of the people? That's what's lost in all of this geopolitical discourse. Like, is this stuff good for the average person in Niger, the average person in Mali, or the average person in Burkina Faso? So this more from this summit. This guy Museveni basically gave a long polemic. Well, it's not that long compared to some speeches that are given at forums. It's only 10 pages, but basically a history of colonization. We should be reminded that by 1900, the whole of Africa had been colonized except for Ethiopia. Liberia was an independent country at this point, but it was also a U.S. puppet state, basically. There's actually a funny account from the first meetings that led to the formation of the African Union, like the first Pan African meetings. The Liberians would show up wearing bowler hats and smoking cigars like British people. So yeah, they're kind of running doggish. So, colonization followed 500 years of taking slaves from Africa and the devastation that the criminal trade ensued. It was not only Africa that was colonized, but also much of Asia, Indonesia, Indochina, Burma, the Philippines, Malaysia, etc., and the subjugation and extermination of the indigenous people of the Americas and Australia. So, going through the history of the resistance to colonialism. The huge country of the Soviet Union was taken over by the communists in 1917, and so was the huge country of China in 1949. Those communists were staunch anti imperialists. Fourthly, our good fortune was that the greedy imperialists started fighting over us. I'm referring here to the so called First and Second World Wars. In effect, these were inter imperialist wars vying for domination. Then he talks about how the imperialists were defeated in various countries. Okay, good so far. As a Maoist, this is not correct. These are the anti-colonial movement of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Okay, there were anti-colonial movements there. But the rise of communism in the Soviet Union, China, Cuba, North Korea, etc. Okay, North Korea, Cuba were never communist. Okay, there's never been a communist country. There's various types of socialism, but like even then, like you cannot identify North Korea as socialist. They removed all references to Marxism from their constitution and official documents, and now it's just like a eclectic mishmash. Whatever keeps the Kim family, I wanted to say dynasty, but I don't want to be accused of being Orientalist, but whatever keeps the Kim group in power, that's what their ideology is. Cuba is speeding up their transition to full-fledged capitalism. It's basically going to be the Sweden of the Caribbean pretty soon. The Soviet Union collapsed after spending 30 years as a revisionist social imperialist power, and China is a full-fledged capitalist imperialist country. The key thing about Maoism is realizing that class struggle continues after the establishment of socialism. If you do not pay attention to the class struggle, your country is going to either collapse or it is going to revert to social capitalism and social imperialism. So, more stuff. He gives some economic figures here. The global value of the coffee business, which is a major export in the East African region, currently is $460 billion. However, all the coffee producing countries in the world take only US $25 billion worth of this. Africa's share is US 2.4 billion, with Uganda taking 800 million because we are now producing 8 million 60-kilogram bags. Germany earns $6.85 billion from coffee, more than all the African coffee producing countries. That's fucked. Like Germany doesn't grow coffee. How the fuck does it make $6.85 billion from coffee, where the country that actually grows the fucking coffee and processes it makes $800 million? So there are people in the United States, like individual multimillionaires and billionaires, who are worth more than the entire Ugandan coffee industry, despite Uganda being a major producer of coffee. That is fucked. That's what imperialism is. And he refers to it like this constant taking by bureaucrats, by imperialists, by various sorts of people who all have their hands in the continent. He refers to it as a hemorrhage that has stunted Africa's growth. So he proposes to Russia, India, China, etc., who are more, these are not allies, these are economic trading partners. So he's asking his trading partners to cut him a better deal. Point out to them that they can help here by policy decisions to buy value-added products from Africa rather than raw materials. These are products like processed coffee instead of bean coffee, chocolate instead of cocoa beans, textiles instead of just cotton, steel instead of iron ore, electric batteries instead of just lithium, etc. Walter Rodney actually talks about this and how Europe underdeveloped Africa, which is his magnum opus that all of you should read. He mentions that like when the Ethiopians, when the Ashanti, when these various groups, relatively powerful groups and polities in Africa, like asked Europe for technology, like all Europe did was just dump surplus goods on Africa that they had no market for. That's these wars were over markets. Instead of sending technology and people to help teach Africans how to develop their own industries, the West sent soldiers and missionaries and a bunch of shit that really served no good in the long term. So that goes on today. Like the West, Russia, and China, they do not want independent industries in Africa. They've reserved for Africa the role of producer of raw materials. They're going to buy your iron. They're going to buy your cotton. They're going to buy they're going to buy your cocoa beans. They're going to buy your beans. They're going to buy your. They're not going to buy your chocolate. They're not going to buy your steel. They're not going to buy your batteries because those would hurt their own industries. Like they make all of this stuff themselves. Why would they buy from you? So Uganda is a net exporter of food. Products like corn, milk, bananas, fruits, fish, cassava, etc. are produced in big quantities, and with irrigation, bigger quantities are possible. Without irrigation, our farmers produce 5.3 tons of bananas per hectare. With irrigation and fertilizers, that production is going to 53 tons in some of the government supported farms. It is therefore important for our partners to know that some of the African countries, such as Uganda, produce huge quantities of food. Moreover, food of unique nutritional value. Beef with yellow fat instead of the cholesterol laden types you get from many parts of the world. Potassium rich bananas, high cream omtwisi milk, fish with enuni, Nile perch bladder, that is a cure for some maladies, millet with protein, carbohydrates, and iron together, etc. So somebody told me on Twitter that Africa cannot feed or arm itself. This is nonsense. Like, look at all of the shit that our people have produced without any foreign influence or meddling. And if this was actually applied to the material well being of the African people instead of serving as trade goods for foreign countries, we would be the healthiest and happiest continent on the world. In the world, rather. So, uh, they're asking for markets. Like that's what all of this comes down to. Like it's not about independence. It's not about socialism. These are not socialist countries. These are not socialist leaders. It's basically going to Russia, trying to negotiate better trade deals. What does Russia get in exchange? They get stomping grounds for Wagner mercenaries, and they get diplomatic support in the UN for their stupid invasion of Ukraine and their continued fuckery in what it considers its world. And he points out more facts. Russia, not Russia. Um, there's a huge market in Africa. Like Africa is a huge continent and it's a young continent. Like countries like Japan is actually losing population because there's not enough kids being born over there to replace all the old people that are dying off. So currently it's 1.5 billion people. Soon it's going to be 2.5 billion within our lifetime, the next 30 years. Africa is 12 times bigger than India in land area. Imagine what could happen if it was united. Today, on account of modern medicine, Africa will have optimal population for the first time in human history. This is especially interesting. Finally, those who ferment wars on account of ideological issues are wrong, and they are time and opportunity wasters. So, what exactly is he referring to? So, if a Maoist movement or any broad left movement took place in Africa. And Africa has very strong left movements, it's just not armed. You have the Economic Freedom Fighters in South Africa, you have the Communist Party of Kenya, you've got all sorts of leftist groups. So if one of these groups declares protracted people's war, which would require them being Maoists, which they are not, um, he would consider this to be a waste of time because they're declaring war based on ideological issues. Like, this would be a just war. He refers to just wars like the anti-colonial wars, okay? So the anti-colonial wars, they had ideological issues. The ideology was fuck France, fuck Portugal, fuck Britain, fuck everybody that takes our wealth and takes our people away. But like, I don't know, that's a bit of a contradiction to me. Wars of hegemony will fail and waste time and opportunity. Dialogue is the correct way. I don't know if he was trying to throw shade at Putin here, but it kind of sounds like he was trying to throw shade at Putin there, because that's what Russia's war in Ukraine is. Um, so yeah, this is just the summing up of what he said. That's actually where I got the PDF from. So he calls for more cooperation and dialogue between Russia and Africa to address these issues and promote industrialization, trade, and peace. Museveni criticized the exportation of raw materials as a form of neocolonialism and slavery. Okay, yeah, like that's the role that they have set for our continent, um, like they're not going to help you build up an industry because they don't want you. They know for reasons that you've already pointed out, we're going to have 2.5 billion people in the next 30 years. So how exactly is a united socialist Africa in the interests of places like the West or Russia and China, who basically just want to use the continent for its relatively cheap labor and relatively cheap raw materials? Like, and like, how exactly is this industrialization going to go? Like, do you basically want Russian and Chinese companies coming and using your country as a place to get cheap labor? Come on. Industrialization with a socialist outlook, relying on what is best for your people and the input of the masses. Not going to Russia asking them to come to cut you a better deal on your coffee. Although that would be nice. Uh, let's see what this account is. Like, the thing with the coups in these countries is that Uganda is an English speaking country because Uganda was a British colony. Um, Niger speaks French. Burkina Faso speaks French. Mali speaks French. Well, I think Mali actually took French off its list of official languages, but these people grew up speaking French. They're going to continue speaking French. I don't speak French. I have no respect for that horrible language. I like pronouncing the letter R. So I'm just using this because it's the account that's actually posting about this in English. The military regime in Niger has, with the immediate effect, banned the export of uranium to France. Over 50% of the uranium ore extracted from Niger is used for fueling French nuclear power plants. 24% of EU uranium exports come from Niger. So they can basically put Europe in the dark. Should they? Yeah. I mean, like, there is no reason for Niger and other countries in the region to continue to export gold and uranium to historical colonizers or new colonizers. So, Africa Archives. This looks interesting. I follow them. This man killed a lion in East Africa, sustaining wounds after fighting the lion for 90 minutes with bare hands while protecting his household. Well, good for you, bruh. The French embassy in Niger has been attacked by the people of Niger. Macron is just a funny looking dude. Like, it's just an uncanny valley thing. He looks like a fucking doll. He's not look like a real person. We must choose either champagne for a few or safe drinking water for all. People are comparing the leader of the coup in Burkina Faso to Thomas Sankara. I really don't think that's an apt comparison. Sankara was all about independence. He definitely took resources from the Soviet Union and Cuba and whoever else offered them, but he did not like it and he did not encourage it. Granted, we're not in the 80s anymore and there is no more Soviet Union, but a lot of people are acting like Russia is an appropriate stand-in for the Soviet Union. It's not. Russia is a capitalist imperialist country, just like the Soviet Union was, but I think the Soviets would have cut them a better deal. Or it might not have. Who knows? So, yeah, they really, really love Gaddafi. NATO has launched more than 10,000 air raids on Libya in 2011 with over 500,000 civilian casualties. When they were questioned about civilian casualties, they insisted it was collateral damage and that this happens in wars. Yeah, fuck NATO. Also, this dude is so fucking hot to me. I don't know why, but he can get it any day. And like, I just like his drip here. I like the red beret. I like the like this is the best camouflage that I've ever seen. Like, you look at American camouflage, it looks like somebody printed it off on a printer from 1985. But like this is actually built to blend into the savannah. Like, this was developed by people in this country. It wasn't developed at a fucking factory in Belgium somewhere. So again, like, people are making this comparison between Sankara and Traore. Um, I would say that Traore, I haven't seen like any real ideological statements from him because like these coups and stuff, like somebody called them Bonapartism and populism, like that. I think that's the best way to categorize it. Um, Sankara did not claim to be a Marxist Leninist, but he did claim to be a leftist, and he did far more for Burkina Faso during his period of leadership than Traore has done. Granted, Traore has only been in office for a few months, So he hasn't really come into his own yet, but he's definitely spewing some fire on the international scene, as is Niger, because their embassy has been attacked. The French embassy has been attacked in Niger, and um, they've stopped exporting raw materials to France. They said, like, we're not giving you shit else. So, as people have been saying, what, are they going to hold this stuff to be sent to Russia instead if Russia cuts them a better deal? Probably. And the United States of America is threatening to withhold aid to them. Like, you know what? Fuck you. We're going to cut you off. That's what a lot of people are mad about. Like, they treat these countries like they're little children. Oh, you've been bad. You're going to get a spanking. We're not giving you any food. And Putin actually mentioned that he's sending several thousand tons of grain to chosen countries in Africa because there was a bit of a concern and worry that that Russians were going to be destroying Ukrainian grain that they had taken, and he's just sending this stuff out to Africa to try to reassure the leaders, which he needs for diplomatic and economic reasons. That hasn't been the case. He who feeds you controls you. So how can yeah, like it's just a contradiction. You're applauding a delivery of Russian slash Ukrainian wheat, and you post this: "He who feeds you controls you." And the Nigerian military told them that they should keep their aid and give it to the millions of homeless people in the United States of America based. So, like, why is the U.S. military in Niger? Like, what is their raison d'entre, so to speak? Like I said, I don't speak French. Drones and motorcycles. You've got ISIS, all sorts of pretty nasty people that would not exist if it weren't for the U.S. destabilizing the Middle East with its stupid invasion of Iraq. Um, Scroll down a little bit. So, in 2002, long before motorcycle attacks became commonplace in the tri border region of the Sahel, the United States began providing Niger with counterterrorism assistance. The U.S. flooded this country with military equipment from armored vehicles to surveillance aircraft. Since 2012, the tab to U.S. taxpayers is more than $500 million and climbing, one of the largest security assistance programs in sub Saharan Africa. In fact, Niger hosts one of the largest, well, it did host, it probably doesn't anymore, hosts one of the largest and most expensive drone bases run by the U.S. military. Built in the northern city of Agadez at a price tag of more than 110 million dollars and maintained to the tune of 20 to 30 million dollars each year. Airbase 201 is a surveillance hub and the linchpin of an archipelago of U.S. outposts in West Africa. Home to Space Force personnel, a joint special operations air detachment, and a fleet of drones, including armed MQ-9 Reapers, the base is an exemplar of failed U.S. military efforts in this country and the wider region. With terrorism skyrocketing in the Sahel while the U.S. pours millions of dollars into security assistance, base construction, and troop deployments, this drone outpost, built to enhance security in the region, can't even protect its own contractors and the U.S. tax dollars that keep it running. Less than a mile from the base's entrance, as The Intercept recently reported, bandits conducted a daylight armed robbery of base contractors and drove off with roughly 24 million West African CFA francs late last year. I gotta read about this shit. Hopefully, I didn't use up all my articles. No, not right now. Fucking thing. Make up an email. No, thank you. So some poor bastard who has the email address motherfucker@gmail.com is going to be receiving emails from the Intercept. I will I'll sign up with my real email address later when I'm off stream because I actually like their stuff. So they basically stuck up the US Army. They robbed the US Army in broad daylight. So 201, the base that they referred to earlier, costs $110 million and costs $20 to $30 million to maintain each year. And it has all of these people here. It has a base security zone. It's protected by fences, barriers, upgraded air conditioned guard towers with custom made firing ports, and military working dogs. So, four dudes in a raggedy ass pickup truck carried out a daylight armed robbery of defense contractors from the base and drove off with 40 grand. And AFRICOM, U.S. Africa Command, the people that run this base, said nothing about it. Nothing. It is troubling that an affiliate of a major U.S. contractor is unable to provide basic security even for payroll funds while traveling near a major U.S. base. I mean, if you know anything about military bases, they're not necessarily the most secure places in the world. But, like, come the fuck on, that's embarrassing. You got dudes riding up on camels, pulling drive-bys on your base and shit. After the contractors withdrew the money from the bank, one of them shared the information with a WhatsApp group of close to 200 people. Oh my God. I'm shocking. I'm shocked. Oh my God. Look at this. That's the car that the stuff is in, that the money's in. This is the people who are robbing. Wow. That is the most ghetto shit I've seen in my life. The Americans have drones, they have planes, they have sophisticated equipment, but it's not helping. As Huey said, the power of the people is greater than the man's technology. So, yeah, that's what the US is up to in Africa, in Niger. You've got your people being robbed in broad daylight by four dudes with a Toyota from 1991. I would not emulate your life off these guys. But I can't tell you what to do. You're grown. So, all of this wealth, $40,000 just sitting in with the, just sit with some, probably some drunk motherfuckers that could just be lifted off of them. So, you've got 4.4 million people experiencing dire food insecurity, a 90% increase compared to 2021. Between January and September, almost 580,000 children under 5 suffered from wasting diseases. This year, the United Nations estimates that around 3.7 million Nigerians, including 2 million kids, will need humanitarian assistance. Many of those in need are also the most difficult to reach due to insecurity. So this country has real fucking problems. And like that's why a united Africa is so important. What exactly is the coup regime? I hate the term regime. Well, I use it ironically all the time, but what is the coup group like going to do to address this? Like, why are you going off to Russia, kissing Putin's ass? And like, why do you have people protesting in your capital waving Russian flags? Like, is Russia going to come save you? That's the thing. Like, Mao taught us that you cannot rely on anybody. Never mind the West, because like or not, Russia is still a Western country. Well, it's both in Europe and in Asia, but like its culture and its history is Western. Okay, Peter the Great, Catherine the Great. Uh, yeah, it's still a Christian Western country. Granted, their Christianity is Orthodox and at odds with both Catholicism and Protestantism, but I digress. All right, so that's what's happening in Nigeria. You've got AFRICOM that can't defend itself, and you've got people burning down the French embassy. Well, I think it just burned a door, but whatever. Where is Traore's speech? France greatly condemns the coup d'etat in Niger. We have uranium, diamonds, gold, oil, and we live like slaves. We don't need the French to keep us safe. So it just seems like, just to me, on the surface, that this is going to end up exchanging one master for another. Um, Assimi Goita, there was also a coup in Mali. He took over 2 years ago. He's expelled the French army, he has broken colonial ties with France, and he has banned French as the official language, but they still speak French there. Um, but like again, this is surface level stuff. You can hate your old colonizer all you want. You can yell at France. You can ban France. You can stop exporting shit to them. But if you're looking for another suzerain, if you're looking for another state to export raw materials to, and you don't fundamentally change what's going on in your country, you're going to have the same problems. Just except instead of AFRICOM, you're going to have Wagner bases in your country. It's disappointing because in Europe, when people take up arms to defend their homeland, we call them patriots. Our grandfathers were deported to save Europe. He's actually referring to the French using colonial troops in both world wars and in a variety of other conflicts around the home continent. But yeah, the French love to use Algerian, Burkinabe, Malian, Senegalese troops, and towards the end of the war, when the Allies marched into Paris, they wouldn't even let the African troops march in the victory parade. It's like, thanks for getting shot at for us, saving a country that you've never been to. Now we're just going to kick you to the curb and we're going to cut off your pension and we're going to send you back to your village, crippled and maimed or scarred for life because you have PTSD over the shit that you were forced to do. And we're just going to send you back to your village with one arm and a broken brain and let you live out your life in whatever peace you can find. We African heads of state must stop behaving like puppets who dance every time the imperialists pull the strings. Glory to our peoples, dignity to our people, victory to our people, fatherland or death, we shall conquer. Ibrahim Touré, Burkina Faso president. So on the surface, it sounds very progressive and very good. But like you have to realize that Russia is also a great imperialist power. So is China, and a lot of this I think is pragmatism. Like I'm pretty sure that Traore knows this, but he also recognizes the fact that his country is fucked over. His country is fucked up. I'm pretty sure the leader of Mali, the leader of Niger, knows that. But it's pragmatism and it's sort of nihilistic in a way because you have the guy out in Uganda, Museveni, saying that any war that started over ideology is a waste of time. So I don't think that any of these people would be keen to see a Maoist-led protracted people's war take off in their country. As a matter of fact, they probably treat them like the Islamic insurgents. So Russia forgives again. See, it's just this ridiculous thing. Like, why do we need people to forgive us? Today, Russia written off more than $20 billion of debt to African countries. At the Russia Africa Forum in St. Petersburg, an agreement was reached on the partial cancellation of Somalia's debts. Two historic documents were signed on debt totaling $691 million. In total, Russia has written off more than $20 billion of debt to African countries, Russian President Vladimir Putin said in May. Okay, so like there is a such thing as proletarian internationalist assistance, okay? But the main stipulation for aid and assistance to be proletarian internationalist is that the country has to be a proletarian run society. It has to be a dictatorship of the proletariat. Russia is not that. Russia is a capitalist country. Again, everybody knows that, including the people who went to St. Petersburg for this summit. But they think that Russia is going to cut them a better deal. So what it comes down to is raw geopolitics, geopolitics, nihilism, and pragmatism. A slave who does not rebel does not deserve pity. That seems like a paraphrase of a Lenin quote. So maybe this dude is read as Lenin. The African Union must stop condemning Africans who decide to fight against their own puppet regimes of the West. Mali has removed the French language as its official language. Mali ordered French NGOs to leave the country in November 2022. Mali suspended French TV stations, RFI in France 24. Mali kicked out France's ambassador in January 22. French troops left the country in August 2022. One thing I'll say about these coup leaders is that they have some drip. Look at this dude. I'm not a fan of the Green Beret because in my country, Green Berets are evil people, but that's a dope fit. I don't like all those medals though. I hate medals. Like I like metal ribbons. I just hate medals. It just looks so garish and tacky to me. But so again, surface level stuff. It's good for building up a sense of national pride, but I just don't. I don't fucking know. Well, I do know. I know that it's going to. These coups usually always end up in one or two ways. They end up with um with the progressive wing being massacred, taken out, like Sankara was, like Maurice Bishop was in Grenada. They end up with basically strongmen, hardliners in power who don't give a shit about anything besides staying in power and padding their own expense accounts for the inevitable moment that they're driven out of the country by either another wing of the military or by their own people. And the second way that it ends is that the initial progressive group stops being so progressive and they just start doing whatever the fuck they want. So Maoists generally do not encourage, wage, or like support coups because they're inherently unstable. Um, this is actually from a Maoist publication of the revolutionary internationalist movement called A World to Win, and it's actually about what happened with Sankara. Sankara, as we know, was murdered in a palace coup on October 15th, 1987. Several members of his military entourage and advisors lay dead at the scene of ambush beside him. Soldiers acted on behalf of rival ministers within the ruling National Council of the Revolution he presided over, hurriedly threw the bodies into a jeep and reappeared with shovels in the middle of the night to throw some dirt over them in a hastily made common grave. That is a horrible death. Like, say what you will about his politics and what happened, but like that's just a horrible, horrible way to die. They did even worse to Maurice Bishop. They murdered him and then they threw his body in the ocean. Like, you deserve to be buried by your family, man. That's horrible. So, what Thomas Sankara died, an experiment in radical reform that had raised the hopes of many in Africa and even elsewhere. Burkina Faso was the most recent attempt to find an independent path to national liberation without a revolutionary war of the masses, without the leadership of a genuine proletarian political party, and without the science of Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought. The coup was the bloody denouement of a play whose ending, like those of the Greek tragedies, was written to the very form itself. I don't know why Maoists cannot write like normal people, but the gist is here. Without a revolutionary war of the masses, without the leadership of a genuine proletarian political party, and without the science of Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought, what we now know as Maoism, you kind of set yourself up for failure. Am I saying that you're definitely going to fail? No. But you're not going to achieve socialism, and you are probably going to end up going out like Sankara did. So, a bunch of economic stuff that's probably not relevant now, but it was part of the French West African Empire. Its borders were altered regularly up until 1947. The vast majority of its population are rural herders and peasant cultivators. Its economy never developed, was distorted and stagnated first by colonial plunder and further ravaged by repeated droughts and famine, bringing in their wake foreign aid from a host of Western imperialists and their parasitical representatives of the IMF, the World Bank, the FAO, EEC, U.S. Peace Corps, and so on. The population is mainly Muslim and consists of numerous ethnic communities, so it's very diverse, speaking over 60 languages and dialects. 90% of the 8 million people live in the countryside, which is completely dominated by Ouagadougou, the capital. The city's population consists of a tiny, modern working class, a fairly large number of government employees, military personnel, artisans, employees of French concerns. So that's what I was talking about earlier. Like the French had, they owned businesses in Burkina Faso. Okay, they've kicked the French out, so they're cozying up to the Russians. Okay, So what imperialist countries do is they export capital. So you're going to have Russian factories, you're going to have Russian businesses, you're going to have Russian concerns, you're going to have Burkinabe speaking Russian instead of French now. That's why I said you cannot replace French massa, German massa, British massa, Yankee massa with Russian massa because the masses, the people who we're supposed to be caring about, the people who they claim to have made this coup on behalf of, are still going to be fucked. They're just going to be fucked by a Russian flag instead of a French flag. They're just going to be exporting They're just going to be exporting Ukrainian. Ukrainium. They should name the next mineral that they discover that. They're going to be exporting uranium to keep Russian light bulbs on instead of French light bulbs. All right, so more French fuckery. Seizing power from above, the left wing officer corps. So this is what we're talking about. This is what's happening in these countries. Except I wouldn't even characterize these people as left wing. Sankara called his revolution a people's democratic revolution, the goal of which was to get the people to assume power. In fact, this concentrates much of the problem. Political power was never seized from below through people's war. So this is the gist of why these coups never end well, despite like initial excitement. Political power was never seized from below through people's war. Communists believe that we have to seize political power in conjunction with the masses. The masses have to be in control, and the party is their instrument. Now, of course, we've made mistakes in the past. Like the party generally turns into an overarching, broad thing with secret police that ends up, especially in social imperialist countries, as a matter of fact, only in social imperialist countries or countries that are running dogs of social imperialist countries, it ends up being basically a another albatross around the neck of the masses. The anarchists have that right, but I'm not an anti-vanguardist. Okay, like there still has to be a concentrated element of proletariat, professional proletarian revolutionaries whose goal it is to further the seizure of power, the movement for the seizure of power by the masses in their millions. Instead, emerging as a charismatic leader of a fiercely nationalist, anti colonialist wing of the country, of the army, the radical young captain Sankara, Traore is also a captain, found himself prime minister in November 1982 when an army doctor commander, Jean Baptiste Ouedraogo, took over the presidency with the collaboration of the left wing officers and unions. Gaddafi Sankara invited Libyan President Gaddafi to Ouagadougou in April 1983 and was promptly arrested shortly after a French African affairs official arrived in town, worried after possible diplomatic realignments. Youth demonstrated in Ouagadougou, and Sankara's left wing officer friends retreated to the elitist paracommandos camp in the southern Burkinabe town of Po and planned a rebellion to get him reinstated. So Sankara's people marched into the capital of the country and took it over. As Sankara put it candidly, without them, we couldn't have won. They prepared the masses for us. Our main support is from the organized workers, by which he means, of course, the trade unions based on the civil servants in the capital. Despite his sympathies for the plight of the peasants and undoubtedly genuine desires to improve their lives, Sankara did not rely on them and they never became his social base. His outlook and line coincided instead with that of the urban petty bourgeoisie, and from the beginning was one which could not liberate the vast majority of toiling masses in Burkina Faso. It is true that Sankara had gained some popularity, and the masses, although mainly bystanders, did not generally oppose him. He was confident that through time he could win it through his revolution. So it's sort of a condescending savior thing. Like, there was no consultation with the masses, there was no organization of the masses. It was just the military being like, here we are, we're going to help you. So, communists and leftists in general need to avoid the idea of a savior that comes from the army or from any other branch of the military to save the people. Only the people could save themselves. That's a core tenet of our ideology. That's why Mao taught us self-reliance. Well, actually we taught ourselves self-reliance at the plantations, but I digress. So, relying on the petty bourgeoisie in the cities and intellectuals, like what the fuck about the workers? What about the um what about the masses? What about the peasants? So it just goes through the situation when Sankara was in charge of Burkina Faso. Then it goes all the way up to his murder. I'm not going to read all of this because I don't have hours to do that, and I don't think y'all want to listen to me drone about it. But I am going to link it when I upload this to YouTube. But yeah, title says it all. You can't make revolution without the masses. So, um, Putin in the um, in the summit met with these various leaders. Let me scroll to Traore, see what Putin has to say. Of course, Putin lies. All imperialists lie. So what did he say? First, I would like to thank you for accepting our invitation and finding the opportunity to take part in the work of the Second Russia-Africa Summit. I think you will agree with me. The meeting was useful and diverse. People expressed their opinions, and those opinions were different, but all the same, all the work was carried out in the spirit of friendship, mutual understanding, and a search for solutions to any issue. Moreover, an interested search. Bilateral ties between Russia and Burkina Faso have traditionally been friendly. Last year, we celebrated the 55th anniversary of diplomatic relations. We know that people in Burkina Faso treat Russia with sympathy and interest. Mr. President, I saw and heard this from you yesterday in your short speech. I wonder if Putin is going to say anything about Sankara. For our part, we also pay great attention to developing relations with Burkina Faso. In particular, we have decided to reopen the Russian embassy, which was closed back in 1992. I am sure that the work of the Russian embassy will give an additional boost to the development of our relations. Our political dialogue is regular. On December 22nd, the Prime Minister of your interim government made a working visit to Russia. Talks between our defense ministries were held in June. So, why are the defense ministries talking? Is Russia preparing to replace AFRICOM and the French? Interparliamentary ties are expanding, which I find important too. We are ready to work together to develop trade and economic cooperation. Our trade is not extensive yet, even in terms of Russia-Africa relations, but I believe we will discuss it today. There is room to grow. Work is underway on agreements too. Corresponding documents are being developed in the spirit of civil aviation, sports, mutual recognition of education and qualifications. We will continue to assist Burkina Faso in training personnel and civilian professions in Russia. In the 23-24 academic year, 10 state scholarships have been awarded to Burkina Faso. If you're interested, Mr. President, we will consider the possibility of increasing this quota. The Soviet Union did similar. Like, there's a lot of older African professionals and stuff that are actually educated in the USSR. Our countries coordinate closely on topical issues on the international agenda, like Ukraine. We can see the good level of interaction at the UN and other international organizations. In June, the Russian government decided to contribute $10 million as voluntary assistance to the UN World Food Program for humanitarian assistance to a number of countries, $2.5 million of which will go to Burkina Faso. So, basically, diplomatic stuff. What do you say to the president of South Africa? Well, this is what the president of South Africa said to him. There was a declaration. Yeah, so they signed a lot of shit. Africa Summit on the Prevention of an Arms Race in Outer Space. Cooperation in the field of international information security. Strengthening cooperation in the fight against terrorism. So, I don't know. Sounds kind of like they're trying to fill somebody's shoes. I wonder whose shoes they're trying to fill. The Russia Africa Partnership Forum Action Plan is designed to implement mutually beneficial cooperation between the Russian Federation and African states recognized by the United Nations and Africa's needed integration organizations, hereinafter referred to as Russian Africa 2326. Ooh, I hate diplomatic documents. Long, long, long. I'd make a horrible diplomat. But like the gist seems to be, I read this shit earlier. Like the gist seems to be that there's going to be more trade, more investment um, by Russia in Africa, aka imperialism. Expert consultations, international conferences, workshops, seminars, meetings to share experiences and best practices on trade and investment imperialist investment policies and regulations, including information on tariff and non-tariff measures. Like, this is how capitalists talk. Like, I don't see what exactly is socialist about any of this. Like, this document could easily have been written by the U.S. The only difference is that the Russians might cut them a better deal. So I guess you might get more in the short term, but in the long term, you're still going to be at the mercy of somebody else. Because, like Sankara, who everybody's talking about, said, those who feed you control you. So all this talk about aid and stuff, like, where's the actual transfer free of charge of technology? Where's the actual transfer free of charge of knowledge? Yeah, you send 10 people to go to Russia. And it's just as much cultural as it is technological. Like, you're not sending those people there just to be educated. You're trying to develop an affinity for Russia. The USSR did the same thing. So, yeah, develop, consolidate, blah, 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 blah. I hate reading shit like this. So, back to Ramaphosa. When it comes to South Africa, we enjoy very good relations with Russia, touching on a number of areas, and it is a multi-level relationship, as you have correctly said. At the investment level, there is quite a number of Russian companies that have invested in the South African market, as there are companies from South Africa that are also investing in the Russian market. So, mutual exchange of capital. We want to look at areas like space. So, yeah. Building up their own imperialist bloc, BRICS. So he's basically summoned all of these people well, it was voluntary. He didn't summon anybody, but he invited them to come to St. Petersburg, and it was just mutual kissing of ass. I guess that's what diplomacy is, kissing of ass. Huh. He sent his congratulations on the 70th anniversary of victory to the people of Korea in the 50-53 Fatherland Liberation War. Led by Supreme Commander-in-Chief Comrade Kim Il-sung during the fierce battles of 50-53, the fighters of the KPA surmounted all the challenges and demonstrated mass heroism as they stood up for the freedom and independence of their homeland. Soviet military personnel, including pilots who flew tens of thousands of combat missions, fought shoulder to shoulder with the Korean patriots, making a meaningful contribution to defeating the enemy. The historical experience of this camaraderie in arms has enduring value and serves as a solid foundation for efforts to further develop political, economic, and security ties between Russia and the DPRK, preserving and building on the glorious traditions of friendship, neighborly relations, and mutual assistance has paramount importance in the face of today's threats and challenges. The fact that the DPRK firmly supported the special military operation in Ukraine, that's the kicker. They're supporting the DPRK because the DPRK supported them. Granted, a solidarity statement isn't much support, but trade is. And it's solidarity with Russia on key international matters, meaning we want your vote at the UN, further emphasizes our shared commitment and resolve to counter the collective West and its policy to stand in the way of establishing a genuinely multipolar and just. Okay, so what is multipolarity? Multipolarity means instead of just one overarching block, instead of just there just being an EU block or a US block or a US EU bloc. Now there's going to be several blocks. That's what BRICS is for. So now there's going to be a Chinese imperialist bloc. There's going to be a Russian imperialist bloc. There's still going to be the old Yankee and European imperialist blocs, but they're eh. But like many imperialisms as opposed to just one imperialism. And how exactly is this just? And there's just more enemies to fight. That's the thing. Like you have so-called leftists, which are basically just modern revisionists, applauding shit like this. Like, why is it necessarily progressive that a country that at one time was communist, that Russia has not been communist in my lifetime? So why is a country, just because it was once a socialist country, I said communist, I'm sorry, like why exactly is it being allowed to carry out imperialism and violent invasions of other people's countries? Why exactly is that progressive? That's what happens when you get geopolitical brain and you forget about the people and you don't read theory. Well, you read theory, but it's just Alexander Dugin, who is a fascist. Don't read him. He's a bad person. The supremacy of international law, indivisible security, and respect for the sovereignty and national interests of states. Okay, so you talk about international law, yet you stage an imperialist, illegal invasion of another country. Like, this is just bullshit. I hate listening to politicians. Well, is Putin a politician? I don't think so. Politicians actually have to go out and win votes. So basically, you've got. I wouldn't consider Ibrahim Traore and these other leaders, like I would not consider them to be representatives of the petty bourgeoisie, but like they're certainly not representatives of the people. And is what they're doing, is that a step towards unfucking Africa? Like from what I've seen, like there's no Maoist movement in Africa. I'm going to eventually do a stream on like why there's no strong, stable Maoist movement in Africa. Just as a hint, like it goes back to the fact that Mao did some really, really fucked up shit in Africa and aligned with some really, really fucked up people in Africa. But like, um, I don't know. As dialectical materialists, we have to realize that shit can pop off and go any way. Like shit can change at the flick of a wrist. So, what's going on in West Africa right now? It has the potential to be progressive, but if and only if, I rarely say if and only if, Ibrahim Traore and these other military leaders realize that any sort of deal struck with Russia is a temporary deal. Because in geopolitics, there are no permanent allies, okay? An ally is by nature unstable. An ally by nature has their own interests at heart. Okay, that's what a lot of so-called leftists applauding stuff like this on Twitter do not understand. An ally is not your friend. Nobody is doing this shit out of the goodness of their hearts. Why is Russia sending grain to Africa? Why are they calling these summits? Okay, why are they doing all of these things? Why are black people waving the flag of a country that has next to no black people in it? Okay? Lenin taught us that if we do not look behind the scenes, like if we don't look beyond the solidarity statements and actually find the interests of one class or another, we're going to constantly be misled. Lenin taught us that, and that's what a lot of people on Twitter and in other spaces that are talking about and applauding this stuff, they failed to learn that lesson. They're being misled and led astray because they have no analysis of the concept of imperialism, and they think that multipolarity, which is basically like I just said, many imperialisms as opposed to just one imperialism, they think that's progressive. They fail to see that this is ultimately not in the best interests of the African workers and peasants, which is who we as communists are supposed to be concerned about. They're concerned with what is best for Russia, what is best for China, or what is best for these individual leaders who stage these coups. But I say that it's progressive because it has the potential to be progressive because they've taken a firm stand against AFRICOM. They've taken a firm stand against EU, particularly French meddling in their countries. And they are still the primary contradiction. But being dialectical materialist and being a leftist, I realized that once you solve one contradiction, you're opening up another one. So instead of one out of every three light bulbs in France being powered by Nigeria uranium, now one out of three light bulbs in Russia are going to be powered by Nigerian uranium. So ultimately, at the root, this is a fight between two rival imperialist blocs, BRICS and the EU US group, over raw materials. That's essentially all that this is. The people that were overthrown, they were Western puppets. Now you've got what have the potential to develop into Russian and Chinese puppets sitting in office. So, what is the way out? Like, how do we unfuck Africa? Ultimately, it will take the energy of the masses themselves to be like, you know what, fuck this. No more of this. We're not Russian slaves. We're not French slaves. We're not German slaves. We're not British slaves. We're not American slaves. We're not anybody's slave. We've been slaves for long enough. Our uranium, our gold, our grain, our chocolate, our bananas. And we're industrializing. And you will strike fair terms with us. We're not going to have Russian and American and British companies operating and exploiting our workers. Okay, that requires a centralized state economy. That requires a correctly guided Marxist Leninist Maoist party with a Pan Africanist perspective. That requires cultural revolution and the realization that class struggle exists under socialism. That's part of why African socialism failed, because they failed to realize that class struggle continues under socialism. They thought that if you hook up with the USSR and have them build you a fucking dam, you're good. It doesn't happen that way because you empower and you enrich a new string of bourgeoisie that grow out of bureaucrats. Okay, Thomas Sankara was killed by his comrade, Blaise Compaoré. The name even sounds like fucking Comprador. So, if you do not come to that realization, I think the closest was Julius Nyerere, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, who realized that TANU, the organization that he built and which came to power in Tanzania, was becoming corrupted. Sankara also came to this realization. That's why he mandated that government officials were going to drive the cheapest cars, and they had to wear native cloth because you had people importing Armani suits and Rolls Royces. Like that's not helping anybody. That's squandering the people's wealth. Same thing with Tanu. Nyere noticed people that he called Wabinzi who were living off the people. So he issued a bunch of stipulations regarding salary and connection to the people. Nyere was also probably the most Mao influenced post colonial leader in Africa. So there's a lot to learn from the past here that continues to inform our present. So is Ibrahim Traore a new Sankara? No, not at all. I think Sankara's analysis was far more developed. I think Sankara was a proto-socialist, and if had he lived, he would have developed further, and he probably would have even become a Marxist-Leninist Maoist. But since he was murdered by his comrades, he did not have that opportunity because Sankara was all about independence. He was not going back and forth to the Soviet Union asking them to give us this, give us that. Like, he did not have people in the streets of Ouagadougou raving the flags of foreign countries. Marx said that history repeats itself. First is tragedy, first is farce. I don't think this is a I don't think this is a full-fledged farce yet, but the the view that I'm seeing out of these countries, black people waving Nigerian flags, it comes off as just ridiculous. Nigerian flags, Russian flags comes off as being, it's just fucking ludicrous to me. Um, and it's not just out of solidarity. Like, these people actually align themselves with Russian interests. So that's a big problem. And that's what happens when you don't have ideological consolidation. Like people have been asking me all day, like, what is the ideology of the coup? Like, what's going on? There is no ideology. Like, communists think that every transition, every coup has to have, like, they didn't write a manifesto for this shit. They simply got their guns, they marched in, and they took power. Like, let me try to give the lie to myself. Let me see. Burkina Faso coup manifesto. I'm not clicking on Voice of America. Like, look, no manifesto. The old junta leader makes way for the new in Burkina Faso's second coup of the year. Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso's ousted coup leader has offered his resignation as long as his security and other conditions were met, and the new junta leader who overthrew him has accepted a deal of religious leaders mediating the West African nation's latest political crisis, said Sunday. And this is what I'm talking about. Like, look, why I'm going to keep talking about this because it's just sad to me. Like, how are you going to be independent if you're waving the flag of a foreign country and you've got foreign mercenaries running through your country? You get rid of AFRICOM, you need to get rid of Wagner too. All right, so you have a coup leader who ousted another coup leader. So it's just coups on coups on coups. They ran him, they chased him out, and he was hiding in a French military base. So the guy that Traore took over from Damiba, he came to power promising to secure the country from jihadi violence. However, the situation only deteriorated as jihadis imposed blockades on towns and have intensified attacks. So it's a pretty similar situation to Niger. So they the main justification was that he wasn't doing his job. So they took him out and they thought that they could do a better job. To some of Burkina Faso's military, Damiba was also seen as too cozy with former colonizer France, which maintains a military presence in Africa's Sahel region to help countries fight Islamic extremists. Some who support the new coup leader, Traore, have called on Burkina Faso's government to seek Russian support instead. Outside the state broadcaster on Sunday, supporters of Traore were seen cheering and waving Russian flags. In neighboring Mali, the coup leader has invited Russian mercenaries from the Wagner Group to help with security, a move that has drawn global condemnation and accusations of human rights abuses. So the U.S. State Department is saying stupid U.S. State Department things, and ECOWAS is mad. So yeah, basically you're replacing a French puppet with what Russia obviously seeks to turn into its puppet. But I don't think all is lost yet. Um, so why am I so opposed to? I'm not an expert on the Rwandan genocide. Uh, that's a very brutal time in African history. Like this shit happened to real people. So when we look at stuff like this, where we talk about this type of history, you got to realize that like this stuff hurt real people. So why am I so opposed to Wagner Group? Oh, the Belgians were definitely involved. The Belgians are involved in almost everything bad that's happened in Central and East Africa. No, it's not. So, transcript. Not gonna play the video because I don't want to get copyright fucked. Uh, Marxist Paul actually got one of his videos taken down because he used uh, the SNL video of Sinead O'Connor tearing up that picture of John Paul II, which sucks. The fate of the agreements between those African countries and the Wagner private military company is up to the leadership of those countries to decide how much are they interested in to continue such cooperation to ensure the security of the authorities. So that's something that revisionists and horrible people always end up saying. Like, oh, they have the right to decide who they have to, but like, what is the quality of these people? Like, what types of people are these? Are these proletarian revolutionary leaders? No, these are people who are trying to stay in power. Like, if you have to hire mercenaries, like, whatever happened to relying on the strength of the people? If you have to hire mercenaries to shoot people in your country, you've kind of failed as a leader, because the role of a state is to serve the interests of one class or another. So if you don't have the supremacy of violence in your country, if you don't have the, I guess in Game of Thrones, in the Song of Ice and Fire, they would call it the right of pit and gallows. Like, if you can't hold down shit in your own country, like, you're kind of fucked. So this is why I oppose Wagner Group in Africa. And I've noticed that, like, people that support Russian presence in Africa are silent like this, but you've got white people or people who are working for white people just going around slaughtering people. That's no good. And then they buried the bodies. So you have the village of Mora in the Mopti region of Mali. They went in and they massacred 500 fucking people. And they committed torture and rape acts. Acts of torture and rape. War crimes. Because mercenaries love war crimes. They've been doing the same shit in Ukraine. But doing horrible summary executions, rape, and torture. And then burying the bodies out in the fucking desert. And the Malian government spokesperson, the people who have these people working in their country, said that not a single civilian in Mora was killed. So you've hired and summoned mercenaries to your country. You have them kill your citizens. And you've also got your citizens waving Russian flags around. And you expect, like, people who are communists, because none of these people are communists, okay? You expect people who are leftists or communists to, like, to support you? Like, that's just Machiavelli lesson number one. He literally said in The Prince that mercenaries are unreliable, that mercenaries are basically a step above criminals, and if you allow them into your country, if you rely heavily on mercenaries, you're going to end up being enslaved by them because they don't want to fight. They love war crimes. They love stealing, rape, horrible things, and they're going to eventually end up toppling you because they sense that you're too weak to defend yourself. You have to hire somebody to fight for you. Like, why the fuck don't you think Rhodesia exists anymore? Rhodesia doesn't exist anymore because it was for a bad, horrible, stupid cause, the preservance of white minority rule in a majority black country. They were fighting against several armed groups, and they had no outside support. Like, Rhodesia spent pretty much all of his existence under sanctions. Granted, smuggling was a thing, and they had to put out ads in Soldier of Fortune magazine to get people to come and fight for this stupid country. So you had all the Nazis, you had all of the detritus of Vietnam. There was literally a group called the Crippled Eagles, Vietnam War veterans. They got their asses kicked in one war, and then they went to Rhodesia and got their asses kicked in another war. So mercenaries are not good people at all. So Wagner Group has about as much business in Africa as African does. So what is the leftist position, the proper leftist position? Because all of these people cheering for Z bullshit and waving Russian flags, those aren't leftists, those are campists. They support one camp over another, even though one camp is just as shitty as the other one. So what is the proper left position on the coups? Um, Coups are bad. I've already explained why coups are bad. I gave you a whole article on why coups are bad, and I'm going to link it in my YouTube channel. But coups are bad because they are unaccountable to the people. Okay? If somebody takes over the government with guns, there's really not much that average people have say in that. They either support it or they don't. Most people, I reckon, would just like to be left alone, and they would like to stop having people pointing guns at them or thrusting flags into their hands to be waved. So they're not relying on the people. And as a leftist, as a socialist, as a communist, I realize that any revolution made on behalf of the people, but not by the people, is not a revolution at all. A revolution is a full overthrow of what exists. It is not a mild change. It's not the replacement of one bad trade partner with another bad trade partner that just shouts more anti imperialist, well, anti Western imperialist rhetoric. It's not that. That's not a revolution. A revolution is a full overthrow of the shitty, currently existing order of things. A revolution is telling both Russia and the West to go fuck itself. A revolution is putting guns in the hands of the masses so that they can fight bad elements in their own country instead of summoning foreigners to come to your country to kill your people. So people might call me an ultra, people might call me a dogmatist, but just keep an eye on the situation. Am I hoping that these progressive sounding coups fail? No. Konnichiwa 1993, you're wrong. There's no socialism left in the DPRK. It's basically a Stalin era theme park, honestly. I have great respect for the fact that they've been able to fly in the face of the West and be a pain in the West's ass for decades, but like, well, all it takes is for China and Russia to get sick of them, and then they'll just. My guess is that they'll probably collapse before the year 2050. So, plus they removed all references to Marx, and well, granted, a reference to Marx does not make a country socialist, but they took out all references to socialism and to anything of that nature from their constitution and other formative documents. So they basically only read what and study what Kim Il Sung and other Kims said. That's not a very proper socialist country. But I digress. Anyways, back to what I was saying. Um, yeah, just keep an eye on the situation. Uh, and like, I'm very skeptical because I'm a dialectical materialist. I'm very skeptical of everything. But like, do I hope that these people fail? Like, no, because there's still progressive elements. Okay, one can be divided into two. Nothing is completely one way or completely the other way. But getting mad at the West, kicking the West out on the surface, and not exporting raw materials to them anyway. That's dope. That's good. Round of applause. But like, if they don't realize that they're setting themselves up for the same stuff with Russia and China, then it's not going to be any good. You're just replacing one master with another. So, don't replace one master with another.